You are listening to WTUZ Radio Podcast. All right. Welcome to WTUZ Radio Podcast. In this episode, this is America's declining birth rate. Over the past couple days in the headline news, there's been multiple articles, and that actually in the mainstream media, speaking on declining birth rates in America, specifically negative birth rates. This is nothing new. They've been talking about it for the past 10 years, and then really heavily the past 3 years. Okay, so it resurfaced again this week, and what made me really take notice and want to present this particular podcast is the fact it hit me. So the U.S. has a negative birth rate, and at the same time, they are having issues with or discussions with immigration. So meaning letting folks come across the border, and specifically the Mexican border, in droves, and that was under Biden, and he recently just stopped it. So it made me connect the two, that all right, so because of the negative birth rates, they are trying to boost the population numbers by letting folks in via the border, via Mexico. So let me read the recent article. This one actually just came out a couple of hours ago. And of course, they're going to blame it on the pandemic. But we know that negative birth rates have been around for quite some time, at least over a 10-year period. It was predicted that we would go, and I shouldn't say we, I should be specific, that Caucasian birth rates would go in the negative. Now, that's not only in the U.S., that's across the world. If you look at Europe, you will see they are in negative birth rates as well. All right, so let's get back to this recent article. Pandemic brings a drop in birth rates in the U.S. This is from Washington sources. There were assumptions that the lockdown of 2020 in the U.S. would lead to higher rates of birth. It was thought so because all the couples were enclosed in their homes and were spending most of their time together. On the contrary, what actually happened was totally against these assumptions. Pandemic brings a drop in birth rate in the U.S. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the birth of newborns has drastically declined, which is known from the data of about half the country as per the Associated Press analysis. In the U.S., there was already a decline in the rate of birth for the last 10 years due to women delaying maternity and having smaller families. Before the pandemic, data shows that there has been a decrease of birth every year by less than 1% in the U.S. The graph showing data about birth rates of 25 states show a downward trend in the years 2020 and 2021. This also happened because almost more than 500,000 Americans died in the pandemic. The data reflects the birth rate decline by 4.3 in the span of 1 year, 2019 to 2020. there was a decline by 8% in the months of December 2020, January, and Feb 2021, as compared to the same duration of 3 months in the previous year. A university professor of population, Columbia, Dr. John Santelli, commented after looking at the AP study that during a crisis, it is quite odd that people will think about reproducing. The AP's analysis was about data from 20 states, to which California was added later. California is known to be the state with the highest population, and it delivered figures reflecting the total number of births, including the visitors that took place in the state. Facts and figures about the whole of the nation are likely to be shared by the Center for Disease Control towards the end of the year. Experts said that there wouldn't be much change in the data of the 25 states at the completion of the year, as the number of births counted initially are close enough to the closing counts. Hans Peter Cole, one of the researchers in the field of fertility and health, working with Pennsylvania University, also remarked about the definite decline in the rates of birth. Last year, in the months of March, it was a different scenario. It was assumed that the couples would make more babies due to spending more time and also finding it difficult to get birth control. So I find that interesting that they thought that the pandemic would cause more pregnancies. That's interesting. An example of a couple named Brian and Katie has been shared, who made plans to make a baby in the last summer, but the pandemic came in at that time. Out of fear, the couple decided to drop their plan of conceiving, as said Brian. Again, after the first wave was gone and infections were less in number, restrictions were decreased, the couple planned to conceive once more. Unfortunately, the cases started rising again. Katie shared that they decided to put pregnancy on hold for some more time, but by the time they were late and were already pregnant. Their pregnancy was worrisome because pregnant mothers are prone to a higher risk of getting infected with the virus. The Health Department of New York reported that the data regarding birth was not available during the outbreak in 2020. The reason for this could be New York being the epicenter of the pandemic. Most of the babies born in 2020 were conceived in 2019 before the outbreak before the pandemic, in the U.S. Therefore, there is a partial reflection of the figures in the pre-existing descending trends. Out of 25 states, the birth rate declined in 23 states by December 2020. The exceptional two were Wyoming and Alaska. In January 2021, the downfall in the birth rate was more drastic in many ways than those 25 states. Okay, so again, this article actually came out today, and it's from Washington sources called "Pandemic Brings a Drop in Birth Rates in the U.S." Okay, so again, this immigration thing, it has been really heating up, really about that 10-year time span, if you think about it, which to me coincides with the low birth rates. And it kind of reminds me of back when we had the massive European migration, kind of the same scenario. If you look at the quote, founding fathers, as they say, I say colonizers, it was all about upping the numbers of the Europeans versus the indigenous Americans. So this is kind of reminding me of the same flavor. And, back then, those of you that are familiar with this channel, you know that we researched and uncovered that the original Europeans were melanated Europeans, and then the Caucasians Europeans started coming in. So by the time you get to the 1800s, specifically mid 1800s, the Caucasian immigration started becoming more prevalent, and there was a massive wave of Caucasian immigration from Europe in the 1900s. Okay, and Benjamin Franklin can be quoted as saying that everywhere he looked around the world was black and brown. Okay, and that was even in the Americas, because his argument was he didn't want African immigrants slash slaves, or if you want to say indentured servants. He didn't want them because there were already too many black and brown and red in the Americas. He wanted to increase the numbers of the Caucasians. So now, flash forward, when we have a decline in birth rates, which specifically the negative birth rate is specifically in the Caucasian race, that's across the planet. Now, all of a sudden, running side by side, the U.S. is back on the immigration topic, and specifically the border of Mexico. All right. Now, interestingly enough, my antennas would not have gone up as much had the U.S. opened their borders to other folks, which that's not the case. They're literally picking and choosing, like they always do, who they decide to allow to become immigrants in the country. And it's overwhelmingly populations that they feel will benefit their particular cause. So, for example, Cubans are allowed to cross over on American soil, long as they make it, so long as they're not caught in international waters, as long as they make it on U.S. soil, they can stay. Haitians, doesn't matter whether or not they get stopped in international waters, whether or not they touch the soil, they're not able to stay. They're out of there. And then you also had one particular senator, and you can go look it up. I apologize, I should have had it for you. She was speaking at a hearing, at a congressional hearing, and she was talking about the fact, because she is Indian from India. And she talked about the fact that the census numbers are being skewed because they are including people of color as Caucasian. Okay? So I'm just pointing this out, and it may not very well be the case. It just seems pretty suspect to me that we're having all of these discussions about immigration, and then all of a sudden they come back out again about negative birth rates, and specifically they're saying that the birth rates were under, what did they say? I think they said under 500K. Under 500K. Okay. So we'll have to keep a close eye on this. This brings a different light into the whole immigration thing. I know a lot of people were looking at it in the light of bringing in immigrants for the purpose of having a dedicated voting population. So meaning if the Democrats bring in Hispanics or Mexicans via that border, that they would be guaranteed a loyal voting constituents. All right. But I really think it's deeper than that. I think it's bigger than that. All right. I think we're looking at a repeat of what happened in the Americas during colonization, when the numbers of the immigrants were trying to become larger than the indigenous population. All right. So I'm not going to keep you all long. It's just some food for thought. I could be totally off on this. I definitely wanted to put the information out there. I hope everyone is doing well, and I wish you well. Peace and love.